Thank you so much for joining us today. We are looking forward to a great session. We have two folks who are going to be sharing fabulous information with us about tips to ensure that we have an effective behavior plan. We have Susan Thomas, who is our educational guru here at Family Connection, and she is going to be speaking with Karen Elfner about some of these tips to use when participating in a behavior intervention meeting. So I will, Susan, let you go ahead and get started. After the seminar or after the meeting, we will be sending out a survey. So if you would just take a moment and complete that survey for us. Any questions that you have, feel free to enter them in the Q&A section. Don't use the chat. It doesn't work as well on webinars, but if you will just enter it in the Q&A section, then Susan, you can let me know if you'd like to do those throughout or at the end. All right, thank you so much.
Perfect. Good morning. It's nice to have everybody here, and we're going to be talking about that and those all-important behavior intervention plans. And I'm so excited to have Karen Elfner join us today. She's recently moved here to South Carolina from Florida. She is working with our Technical Assistance Center that's sponsored by the State Department of Education Office of Special Education Services. It is our Behavior Alliance of South Carolina, housed at Clemson University, and we're excited about that Technical Assistance Center starting and the things that we're going to be able to offer to educators and families. And so Karen comes to us from Florida. She started out as a teacher, and you know, my hat is off to her because she worked with students who had significant behavioral needs. And she has spent many years of her career doing research and also training. But to me, the most impressive thing that I like about her is that she has devoted a lot of time to working with families, and she has some books for families about positive support. And so I'm so happy she could join us today and help us, and and talk with us because she knows so much about this area. So the format we're going to have today is we're going to kind of have a conversation with some questions, and she's going to give us some advice. If you do have questions, if we have time, we'll try to address them. If we don't, we'll make sure we get back to you. I would like to say, if you have specific questions, maybe you have a child that is struggling with specific things, we'll ask you to contact Family Connections or put in the chat that you need someone to contact you with specific information, because that takes a little bit more than we can address today in this short amount of time. So I'm going to get started. Karen, welcome.
Thank you. I'm very excited to be here.
So is there anything else you want to share with our audience about you?
Well, I would just share, because this is really for supporting families, that that I understand my take on families and behavior support. I had my first child was, of course, perfect, and I was, of course, responsible for his perfection in behavior. And then my second child came along, and that was when I realized I had nothing to do with the purpose or his or her behavior. And I decided that if I was going to take responsibility for the good behavior, I had to take responsibility for the challenging behavior. So I was throwing my hands up and saying I wasn't responsible. But all that just to say that as it's very challenging being a parent and dealing with challenging behavior, and some children have far more challenges than others, really is an exhausting thing to have to deal with. And when you've been a teacher who's then also dealt with challenging behavior, it's not an easy thing to do. But if we can find a way to get teachers to tap into the families and what families know about their kids, because they carry that knowledge with them from year to year and teacher to teacher. And then I think we can really do some really great things for our kids by working together. So that's kind of my goal in my career, is to make that happen.
And that is so true. And it is that collaborative nature of what we do. And thank you for sharing that. I too had one of those perfect children, and one that presented with some challenges. So I understand that. So we're going to just start and talk a little bit today about behavior intervention planning, and about those plans. So talk to us a little bit about the benefits of a child having a behavior plan, and why we would want to have one for a child that's presenting with challenging behavior at school.
Well, in the absence of having a behavior plan, then you just kind of get what you get, right? So it could be random acts of how a teacher chooses to respond when a challenging behavior happens. So the way that I always think of it from a teacher perspective is, the teacher's goal is to conduct instruction. That's what they're focused on. And so it's only when a child is engaging in a problem behavior that disrupts the flow of instruction that their attention is drawn to that problem, and then they respond to the problem. So teachers aren't geared to thinking about, how do I prevent problems? How am I going to orchestrate my class so that the students in my class aren't going to engage in problems, or how can I prevent those problems from happening? They're focused on how to carry out instruction, and they typically will, just by nature, only respond when their flow of instruction is interrupted. And so, and the way that they respond is, you want for your child, for them to be effective and be able to engage in the classroom in the most effective way so they can learn. And so without a plan that's previously thought out with intention and good, based on a good foundation, then the response, or the way that that behavior is going to be addressed, is going to be random, and random acts of intervention are never good.
That is so true. And I'm going to add a little bit to that. When would a parent want to maybe ask the school about a behavior plan?
Well, if you're getting a repeated report from the teacher about behaviors occurring, and you're not going to get probably positive reports, but about a problem that's happening in repeated fashion, then that would be a flag to me that my child has a recurring problem. And a recurring problem means that we need to look at the situation, do some assessment to try to figure out what's going on and how we can correct the situation to prevent the problem from happening, provide some skills and the things that we need to do in order to make the child and the circumstances better for that child. So anytime that you're receiving repeated problems, say in a 2-week period, 2 or 3 weeks period, you're getting multiple reports from the teacher about common behavior problems. That's what we also instruct teachers, is if you have a student who's having a repeated problem over a condensed period of time within a 2 or 3 week period, rather than just continuing to respond however you might randomly choose, that's when you need to stop and start to take some concentrated time and assess the situation.
Perfect. And you're better off to, I think, ask and go to the school and talk with them than to wait. I mean, it's always okay to do that.
It's always okay to ask, and perhaps by your initiating the request and not waiting for them to call you in, they will identify that you're a concerned parent who wants to be part of the solution, and they're more likely to help invite you to be part of that team.
That's a great point. So when we think about behavior intervention plans, what are the components? What makes a really good behavior intervention plan? What should we expect to see?
Well, I have seen and reviewed thousands of behavior intervention plans in my career, and the thing that I have thought most about a plan is first that they aren't very good very often. And I wonder when I look at them, is anybody really trying to improve the behavior of this child? Like, is the goal actually to see improved behavior for this child and success for the child? So what we know is in order to have an effective behavior intervention plan, you have to have a very accurate and clear understanding of the problem behavior and why it's occurring. And so that process, which is often formally called a functional behavioral assessment. So the assessment of what is happening, what the behavior problem is, why it's happening, that assessment and understanding is critical to being able to develop an intervention plan. Because that would be like a doctor giving you a really beautiful treatment plan for diabetes when you have MS. It might be a great intervention, but it's not for the illness that you have. So it's not what is a beautiful intervention plan. It's does this intervention plan make perfect sense given the function of the behavior, when it happens, why it happens, in the context that it happens, for the reasons that it happens, because all behavior serves a purpose or a function. And understanding that function will naturally identify what intervention needs to be. So if you clearly identify the circumstances that set up the likelihood of a behavior occurring, then you'll know exactly what needs to happen in order to make it less likely to occur. So that assessment is critical. And so I would first say, I want to be involved in the assessment process, and I want to make sure that my child is having a functional behavior assessment that is conducted by someone who has good skill, and that I get to be part of that process. I get interviewed because I understand my child, that if my child is cognitively able and old enough to be able to communicate, that my child gets to be part of that process. We found that students have a lot of insight into why they do certain things and why they don't do certain things in other situations. And sometimes we don't even go to the source. So
that's so important. I love that you brought up the functional behavior assessment and the importance of that and involving, it is a team approach when we're doing that to get information, the person gathering that information, and that be done when we're considering especially major changes that need to be made to even an existing plan. We need to always go back and look at that functional assessment. I've seen some behavior plans in my career, like you, I've looked at thousands as well, where everything's about what the child is going to do. I'm just wondering about when we think about that, and I think about prevention, and certainly want to teach the child a better way, but what about prevention for what would I see on a good behavior plan?
well, mostly a behavior plan is built of components of things that the adults in the environment are going to carry out. So if you see the steps and the pieces of an intervention plan and it says the child will, the child will, the child will, that's a flag. Because what a good intervention requires is a change in the adult behavior so that you see a change in the child behavior. So whether it's something like giving choices or providing extra pre-instruction or providing peer support or proximity, to that student or changing a seating arrangement, those are all things that adults do in order to make the child successful. There are sometimes the child might do something. You might teach the child to take a break by using a break card. And the child may be taught to, use the break card, and then that is an action that the student does. But the teacher has to create the break card, teach the child how to use the break card, reinforce the using of the break card, recognize when he's using the break card. So think of all the little things that the adults in the circumstance have to do for that one thing that the child does, which is raise the brake card when feeling frustrated or tired or whatever. So it really is largely the adults changing their behavior. But the components of an intervention plan, first of all, they would identify the target behavior very clearly. So what is, and students may have several behaviors that the teacher is concerned about, or you may be concerned about. But what we really encourage is if this one behavior were eliminated, or one behavior happened, like if it's a positive behavior you want to increase, like on task and engaged in instruction, then 90% of everything would feel so much better, right? So we're not correcting everything, but if we pick the one thing that would have the biggest impact on the quality of life for the student in the classroom, then let's focus on that and define it in a way that is very objective. We can see it when it's happening. We can, if we word it in a way that if I walk in, I recognize it, and Susan recognizes it, and you as the family member know exactly when it's happening, so we all are on the same page, then that helps us be able to know what we're focusing on and be able to identify the functions, right? And we do the good assessment. So we need to make sure we have that defined behavior that we're intervening about with that good hypothesis statement, which is kind of setting in context where the why of that behavior that we got from the assessment. So in this context, this child will engage in this defined behavior because. So we get that hypothesis from the assessment, and the intervention needs to recognize that. So if the intervention doesn't include the behavior defined and why it's happening, then the intervention plan isn't related to the why of the behavior, and it won't make it, it's random. So it should always have that component, and then it should have a prevention part. So something that we're doing, knowing what sets the stage for the behavior. We've already investigated that. We know what's happening, who's around, what are the instructional circumstances or environmental situations that are more likely to trigger that behavior. Then we modify the behavior, the environment, to make it less likely to occur. It doesn't mean that it's never going to occur, but we know that that's one factor. And then we look at what's a replacement behavior. So if the student is frustrated in certain academic situations and they tear up their paper, yell out in class, whatever, because of the frustration, then we want to teach them another way to express or to deal with that frustration. So whether like it's a break card or it's taking time, teaching them some self-control skills. So what is the replacement behavior that we're going to be teaching the students? So there's always new skills that we're trying to focus on, or a skill that maybe the student already knows but isn't really using. So we want to reinforce their using that. So we want to every time remind them to use those skills, recognize when they're using those skills. So that has to do with how are we responding to the behavior. So you have the prevent, you have the skills, what do we want them to be doing? And how are we responding after the behavior happens? So if the behavior we're trying to replace with happens, we want to make sure we're saying, oh, great job using that break card when I saw you were getting frustrated and you used that break card. Or how are we going to respond if the child slips up and uses and engages in the problem behavior, even though we're trying to. So how are we going to minimize the reinforcement of the problem behavior? So if the student gets out of doing the task, and that's why they're engaging in that problem behavior, because when I tear up my work and then I get sent out of the room and then I don't have to do my task, well, we don't want to reinforce that. So we're going to change what happens when that student is upset and frustrated with the task. Maybe we have them have that cool down time, because what we know about behavior is you can't engage when they're at the peak of the frustration, but when they come down, then we re-engage them with the support they need to be able to do the task successfully with less frustration, and then we do it again. So What we want in a plan is prevention, we want new skills, and we want to clearly identify how we're going to respond to the behaviors we want to see and when we see those behaviors that we're trying to eliminate.
Perfect. And I think, as we go in and look at those in meetings, we need to make sure those things are addressed. And I love what you talked about. We've got to make sure we've looked at that function or the purpose of the behavior, and that we have interventions that are matching those things. And you may want to ask the team, if you're as a parent, let's talk about this and make sure that they can explain. The other thing I like to see, Karen, I don't know if you do, but I like to see if there's a need for training for staff. In a behavior plan, sometimes we might want to put that as a prevention, because a lot of times many of our students are in a general ed classroom, or even if they're in a special ed class, special education classroom, wherever they are. All the staff members need to understand if we're teaching skills so that we can prompt and reinforce. I like to see that added, either a lot of times those things get put in the IEP, but it can also be put in a behavior plan. There's no reason it can't be.
Yeah, I absolutely agree that teachers who are going to have to carry out the plan need all the support. That's part of the plan. You can develop the interventions, but then how are you going to support the people who have to develop the interventions to be able to do it? So just putting it on paper doesn't make it so, right? They need to, and some people will need a lot more support than others. They may need another instructional coach to come into the classroom and demonstrate it for them first. They may have no idea how to really give good verbal reinforcement. It just may not be in their nature to do that naturally. So the level of coaching and support may be different for different teachers. But you can also, in terms of the new skills that students are learning, that's a wonderful thing that you as a family member can do at home too, because very often those skills and those behaviors that are challenging are things that they need to reinforce and develop at home too. So how I deal with frustration, or how I handle when I want to get someone's attention, or all these kinds of things can translate in developing those skills. And if you know the skill that they're working on and you're using the same language and the same strategies and techniques, you can reinforce and use those at home as well.
And that's important, because the more we have that connection between school and home, the more successful the student's going to be when we're consistent and have kind of the same message. So it's important to make sure you know exactly some of the, I always call them scripts, if we have certain things we're using and saying to students, that we use that same language. And so that's a great point we think about implementing. When a lot of times we put students on behavior intervention plans and we don't really know how they're doing. And I know I've been in meetings before where we don't have good information about how the plan's working. And so talk a little bit about how we can make sure, particularly as parents, that progress is being monitored and that the plan is effective. And maybe what do we do if we see, you know what, I'm still getting the call every day, and what we can do as parents.
So if you go back to when the problem started happening and we're doing the assessment and trying to really define what it is, why it's happening, during that process, there should be some data gathering in that process. And it could be very precise scientific data, or it could be just sort of casual, like how many incidences, and a teacher just does a tally on her desk or something. So the data collection can look very differently, but there should be some level of collection of information that's in a data form, so that you have a sense of how often or how long it lasts. So the data might be a number, like a frequency, or it might be an intensity. So on a scale of 1 to 10, this tantrum was an 8, this tantrum was a 9, so that whatever the behavior is, you have a sense of either how often or how intense, or, depending on the kind of behavior, the data may look a little different, so that you know where you're starting. And then they should be setting some goals. So based on where you're starting, the team, which would include you, would establish some kind of goal. So what's the time frame? Maybe 2 weeks from now, we would hope that what was, 5 events in a week would go down to 2 events in a week, or we'd see no more than 1 event in a week, or whatever your goal is. And then the recording of number of events would continue to go on, and that you would get, the teacher would maintain, or whoever is gathering the information, and you would get, as a parent, the updates on what they would call progress reports. So a progress monitoring of how the student's doing in response to the intervention. Because then at the monitoring point, so say 2 weeks in, they look at the data, they assess it towards wherever they had established the goal. And if they're not meeting the goal, then the first question that you would ask, and that they should be asking, is, did the intervention get implemented as it was planned? Because you can't expect the student to have outcomes if they didn't carry out the plan. Right? So if they did in fact carry out the plan, and one way that you could ask them how they know that it was carried out is, if the plan is defined well, they should have like the components of the plan on a list. And then the teacher could periodically check off, I did this, I did this, I did this, I did this. And that's a very simple way to just verify that. And it's helpful. It's kind of like a reminder checklist also for the teacher, because they're doing 100 things. I've been a teacher, you're doing 100 things at once. So it's helpful to remind you of all the components for this one of your many students that you need to do these pieces of the puzzle to help the student. So it serves as a reminder. It also serves as a checklist of that you've completed the components. So those are some of the things that you should be able to ask for and look at to determine if it's being carried out and how the student's responding.
I think that's a great point. And 2 things that I'll say is just when you're developing the behavior plan during the meeting, it's really important to ask, that they show you how they're going to collect data to see if the plan's working. And I think as a teacher, that helped me, because if I already had to think about that before I was implementing instead of after the fact, and I've unfortunately done it both ways. And I've found it so much easier when I did it beforehand and had that data collection sheet. So you may ask for that as a parent. I think that's really important. And I love the idea of the checklist, because as a teacher, I, like you, Karen, you got a million things going on, and having something that I can just refer to and make sure I'm getting those things done, because most teachers want to do what's right to help students. They do have a gazillion things going on in their classrooms. So the more we can give them support, that helps to get those things implemented. We touched on this a little bit, but I want to go back to just how at home we can really support the implementation of the plan, certainly using that same language, but also, when do we need to contact, the school and the teacher? What are things we might want to make sure they know as far as behavior and things going on with their children?
Well, I think knowing that you are aware of what the quality components are, and that you are concerned and informed and want to be part of the process, I think will push them to be more on top of things. And that you want to learn and understand the process so that you can actually apply these things and use these strategies at home. Because knowing that you are somebody as a partner who is trying to understand how to understand behavior, how to respond to behavior in effective ways, I think makes you a valuable partner to the school, rather than what they may see as an adversarial partner, which is, you're not supporting my child, so seeing you as somebody who's trying to support the process, trying to understand and learn so that you can and do things to support your child as well and learn from them, encourages them to raise their standard of practice, because they're being looked at like they're the ones coaching you too. So I think that's a nice way to build that bridge.
I love that approach, and we are partners together, and I think that's what's important. Karen, thank you so much for sharing all your knowledge, and we are just so fortunate to have you in our state, and we're looking forward to more. I am sure that Family Connections is going to be reaching out again. We just appreciate it, and Melissa, I will turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Susan. I have really enjoyed this training. There were several things. Karen, whenever you talked about, a good plan should involve prevention, first of all, that just seems so obvious, but prevention, the new skill, the replacement behavior, and then the response. And the way you kind of broke it down, it made so much sense. So I really, really appreciate that. I did want to share with everyone, just remind you once again that a survey will be sent out to all attendees afterwards. So if you will just take a minute to complete that. Also, we do have another training coming up next Tuesday, and registration is still open for this. It's going to be set up in a similar format to the one we did today, which is what should I do when my child has behavioral concerns at school? So that will be on Tuesday, December 13th from 10:30 to 11, where we will receive some helpful tips from a school administrator and a parent on how to address behavioral concerns. So I look forward to folks joining us then, and thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you, Susan, and thank you, Karen.
If you have questions, Family Connection is here to help. You can call our Family Information Center at 800-578-8750 or visit our website www.familyconnectionsc.org.